Hi, person. I see one person here. Want to hear some spooky Florida stories? And then we'll go to sleep. You want to listen? Okay. And if you're listening on a replay, I hope you enjoy it. Hi, whisper to me. Hi. I just took some Ambien. Just a tiny little bit of a tablet. Okay. Spooky Florida. Hey, Lori. It's awfully late. Me coming on super late, huh? I tried to come on earlier, but no go. Hi, Jess Ruby. Gonna read some spooky Florida. Figure switch out the books, you know? We did Spooky California the other night. Yeah, I left the movie. It was over. Some were starting to watch another one. But and let's see what we got going on in Florida. Okay, good, Lori, good. I wasn't ready to go into bed yet. I was super tired. Then I got my second wind. I just, Ruby. Okay, we'll do the introduction. I was up at dawn on the last day of my Florida research trip and hurried out to Highway 1 with camera in hand. If the Islamorado ghost car, the antique car, appeared, I was determined to document it. No deal. The wind crossed my cheeks, bringing the scent of salt water with it. Two brown pelicans flew overhead and disappeared behind a screen of palm trees. Still no ghost car. Sighing, I shouldered my SLR and headed back toward the hotel to pack up my bag. On the way, I was sidetracked by a gorgeous sunrise over the Atlantic and spent several minutes laughing at the antics of five seagulls perched on the wings of a waterplane. How could I go back to snowy New York after all this? After a quick breakfast, I pointed the car north toward Miami and the Everglades. On my last day, I had decided to visit the Miccosukee Reservation and take one more airboat ride through the grassy river that is the Everglades. I love it down there. Though on this trip, I probably would not make it to the spot where Flight 401 went down in 1972, leaving behind wreckage and a bevy of ghosts. Still, it was a lovely warm day, and ghost or not, I was determined to enjoy it. First stop, the recreated Mikasuki village. As I strolled through the exhibits, I was drawn to a crowded theater facing a pen containing water, a bit of sandy beach, and a heck of a lot of big alligators. Oh boy, I watched in amazement as the man from the tribe pulled an alligator out of the water by its tail, which doesn't hurt them, and wrestled with it. According to his explanation, alligators, once a food staple of the tribe, had to be brought home alive where their meat would spoil. This practice resulted in a series of moves that is today called alligator wrestling. As the man performed amazing feats with a very large alligator, I pondered on another Native American who long ago fought an 18-foot rogue alligator that was exterminating the people in his village one by one at Spook Hill. In the ensuing fight, a huge crater was created. It later filled with water and became a lake. That was some awesome gator wrestling. After the gator wrestling exhibition, I got to meet the tribesmen and hold a baby gator in my hands. For several minutes, the baby gator breathed gently against me and watched with one unblinking eye. He was as content in my hands as he would have been if he were lying on the riverbank in the sunshine. The gator wrestler told me later with a hint of awe in his voice, "You sure have a way with animals." Hey, Steph, are you just getting up or going to bed? Glad you showed up. You're a nice surprise, too. Everybody's a nice surprise. All four of us. All five of us. We're getting the big numbers tonight. Let's see. My final stop for the day was just going to bed. My final stop for the day was the airboat ride across the street from the museum. Stuffing cotton balls in my ears to help preserve my hearing against the loud engine, I laughed in delight as we swept out into the vast Everglades, zipping across the water and through the grass and scaring a blue heron to visit a traditional Mikasuki village, carefully preserved on one of the islands. We even made a side trip to see the ruins that were all that remained of the home of a traditional medicine man. I wondered if he had ever encountered black magic, the way one medicine man had told during the English settlement of Florida, Little Lucy. It was with regret that I climbed back into the car and headed for the airport hotel, where I would spend the last night of my research trip. It was a perfect end to a perfect trip, which had taken me from Jacksonville all the way down to Key West, zigzagging between the Atlantic and Gulf Coast. During my time in Florida, once home to my grandfather Lloyd, I met wonderful folks, ranging from conscious who lived in the Keys all their lives to immigrants newly arrived in Miami. Florida is filled with people from all walks of life: farmers, businessmen, students, retirees, theme park managers, and artists. It was a privilege to meet them and hear their stories. And it was an honor to retell the wonderful folklore I collected from their beautiful state, which I first came to love as a child when staying with my grandfather. May you enjoy reading this collection of tales as much as I enjoyed writing it. And the next time you're in Islamorado, keep your eyes peeled around dawn. You just may see that ghost car I missed. Part 1, Stories. Hi, Mary. We love having you and Steph and Lori and Whisper to Me and Jess and Whisper to Me, I already said. Okay, our little reading nook. And Elizabeth T. Welcome to our little reading nook. The antique car in Islamorada, Florida. Islamorada. I was up before dawn, pulling on my outdoor gear and grabbing my fishing poles out of the garage. I tiptoed so as not to wake the missus, who had made it clear when we moved to Islamorada that retirement for her meant sleeping in every morning. When I asked her why she'd married a fisherman then, she threw a sofa pillow at me and laughed, but I knew she meant it, so I was always quiet when I left on an early morning fishing trip. Today, I just wanted to throw my line in under the bridge and see what was biting. It was a pearly gray morning with a soft mist curling around the edges of everything. The mist would burn off pretty quick in the light of the sun, but just now it made the world soft and mysterious. I paused to appreciate it for a moment, listening to the early morning grumbling of the gulls mixed with the call of a grackle. Then I put my gear into the car and backed out of the driveway. I don't know if I put in the title that it was going to be a short one. I'm not done yet. I didn't even finish that. But yeah, because I did take a little bit of Ambien, a tablet, a little bit of a tablet. So I, might start talking a little weird and pass out. Sorry, one moment. Trying to get my throat to sound better while I read. Thank you, Elizabeth. It relaxes me. Oh, hi, Angie Brooks. Really, Mary? Okay, that's perfect. Because I wanted to go to bed, but I felt like reading a couple of these stories first. And it's nice and quiet because Dave finally went to bed like an hour ago. So the TV's not blasting. Okay, let's get back at it. A minute later, I hope you guys can hear me, right? A minute later, I was pulling out on Highway 1, heading toward my favorite fishing spot. The mist was a little thicker inland, and practically no one was on the road. I kept up a steady pace for about a mile, but slowed. Okay, good. It slowed when I saw dim red taillights ahead of me. The mist was thinning now, and the pearly gray sky was lightening with a bit of golden dawn as I hit the brakes and slowed down. In the uncertain light, I saw a big old four-door antique car painted black in front of me. Its headlights were on, but they were much dimmer than mine. It was chugging along down Highway 1 as if it had all the time in the world to get where it was going. Now, I'm an impatient man, but this car was going too slow for my liking. Still, what could I do? It was a double line right here, and it didn't look like the old behemoth in front of me had been the speediest of vehicles, even when in its prime, which would have been circa 1930 if I had judged it right. I pulled my sedan closer to the car's back bumper, hoping the chap inside would take a hint and head over to the side of the road so I could pass in safety. But he ignored me. My headlights picked up the sandy color of his hair over the tall back seat. I wondered briefly who he was as I eased up on the accelerator and allowed more distance between our cars. I didn't know everyone in town, not by a long shot, what with all the tourists that came here to fish. Still, I recognized most of the locals after living here a few years, and this fellow didn't look familiar. Of course, it was hard to tell from the back. Anyway, I didn't know of anyone hereabouts who owned an antique car like this. Maybe he was an eccentric millionaire touring the Keys in a classic car, I mused as we putted along Highway 1. We were the only cars on the highway at the moment. It was still too early for anyone but the most hard-nosed fisherman to be out. Well, and this crazy guy, I amended. Obviously, he was awake too, though I didn't see any fishing gear sticking up out of his back seat. Could be in that big trunk, I speculated. It would be interesting to see where he turned off. Maybe we'd both end up fishing by the bridge. We were nearing a bridge now, though not the one I aimed to fish. The big black car rumbled toward the bridge in the swirling mist, and for some reason, my skin began to prickle as I followed it. The mist around the car was behaving strangely, blowing across the car instead of over it, as if it were being bandied about by a very strong wind. At the same time, I fancied I could hear wind howling all around me, though I felt nothing save the soft breath of a car heater. But in front of me, the antique car was shuddering, as if pummeled by a gale I could not feel. It started up the slope of the bridge, swaying from side to side, as if it were struggling to stay upright against a hurricane-force wind. Then the car tipped alarmingly onto its side and vanished. I gasped in alarm and hit the brakes. My sedan shuddered to a halt as I gazed in alarm at the now empty road in front of me. What had happened? Had the car gone over the side of the bridge? I hadn't seen it fall over the bridge, and the guardrail was still intact, but I had to check. I pulled to the edge of the road, parked the car haphazardly, and ran onto the bridge. As I reached the place where the antique car had disappeared, I walked into a cold spot and found myself standing in the darkest night, my body buffeted by a thunderous wind. I was immediately soaked by a painful tropical downpour, and right beside me, I dimly perceived a large black car flipping over with a deadly bang in the force of that terrible wind. A second later, I saw the black car slid off the side of the bridge, followed by a thunderous splashing that was so loud it could be heard over the monstrous storm. Just faintly above the crashing sounds, I thought I heard a man scream. Icy cold chills ran through my entire body at the sound. Then I was catapulted back to the present by the loud beep of a car horn, followed by a familiar voice shouting, "Morning, Jim. You're up early." I blinked, and the golden light of dawn filled my vision. I was back on the bridge, and the mist was clearing under the first warm rays of the sun. Cross-eyed Betty, nice to have ya. Good morning. You fancy a story this morning? Spooky Florida stories. Thanks for coming, Cross-eyed Betty. Now all we need is Big Mama. And let's see. Morning again, Elizabeth T. Morning, wake up. Good, Cross-eyed Betty. I'm glad. We're in our little reading nook. Not every state is mentioned, Steph. So far, I have two more coming. I have this one, Florida, I have California, and then two more are coming. Um, New Jersey, and I can't remember the other one. I just said it yesterday. But there's more I'm going to order after that, too. I'm going to order Virginia, Massachusetts, New York. I'm going to get Pennsylvania, Texas. There's a bunch of them. Canada. I whirled around and saw that my next door neighbor's car had slowed to a stop beside me. He'd rolled down the passenger window and was grinning through it. Then he saw the look on my face, and his grin vanished. "Are you okay?" he asked in alarm. "I saw your car parked by the side of the road and figured you were looking for a place to fish. Did the car break down?" I pulled myself together with an effort. My whole body was still shaking from the strange experience. Abruptly, I jumped into the passenger seat and motioned my neighbor to pull over. He drove down the far side of the bridge and parked at the first turnoff. "What happened?" he asked bluntly as I rubbed my chilled arms, trying to warm them as my mind replayed the scene over and over. Around us, the mist was lifting. The sun grew brighter as it rose, beaming golden rays over the lovely turquoise blue of the Atlantic Ocean. Hesitantly, I told him about the antique car I'd seen, which had vanished on the bridge, and the cold spot I'd walked into just before he arrived in his car. Almost immediately, he started nodding his head as if he had heard it before. I was relieved at his response. I figured he'd tell me I was crazy. Heck, I thought I was crazy. Cars, even antique cars. Hey, Nicole Griffith. I was there in the movie night, Nicole. I left after the movie was over. I'm glad you're here. Carolyn and I had a little chat for a while, and then she was getting ready to go to sleep. And I was getting ready to go to sleep. Then I thought, wait, I want to read a couple of these stories. So I'll just read them to whoever wants to come in and then go to bed. Okay, let's see. Hesitantly, I told him about the antique car I'd seen. Oh, wait, I already read that. Cars, even antique cars, don't vanish into thin air. And that cold spot, just thinking about it, made shudders run up my spine. "You saw the ghost car?" my neighbor said confidently. "It runs along the highway occasionally, mostly at night or in the early morning." "A ghost car?" I asked in alarm. "Yep," said my neighbor. "Been seen around here for decades. Folks reckon the car was blown off the bridge during the hurricane of 35. A lot of people were killed then, and the car looks like it was made sometime in the 30s. Here's an illustration of the car getting blown off the bridge. I nodded in agreement. I'd heard quite a bit about the Labor Day hurricane that destroyed Flagler's Railroad and much of the Keys. I was sure that more than one car had been blown off the road in that terrible storm. Anyway, it was as good an explanation as any, and it dovetailed nicely with what I'd heard and seen when I walked into the cold spot on the bridge. My neighbor punched me lightly on the shoulder and asked, "Are you still up to some fishing?" "The missus told me not to come home until lunchtime. She's working on a painting and doesn't want to be disturbed. His wife was a retired artist who sold her work at one of the local galleries. Sure, I said. My neighbor turned his car around and drove me back to the place where I'd parked mine. Then we both drove to my favorite fishing spot and settled in for the morning. But as I tossed my line into the water, I decided that from now on, I was going to drive the other way if I ever saw that antique car again. I'd had enough of ghosts. This one is called Skyway, St. Petersburg, Florida. Dark clouds were rolling in fast from the Gulf as I made my way down the highway toward St. Petersburg in my 18-wheeler. I was making good time, so I kept up a steady pace and listened to NPR on the radio as heavy storm clouds moved across the sky, bringing an eerie green dusk with them. I caught a glimpse of lightning on the edge of the horizon and did a quick bit of calculating. If I kept up the speed I was going, chances were good that I'd hit the Sunshine Skyway Bridge around the same time as the storm. I didn't relish going across the 15-mile long engineering masterpiece during a downpour, but luck wasn't with me. I kept rolling, and so did the clouds, and we both were headed for the Skyway. As the storm grew closer, the trees started bending in the gusty wind. It grew so dark, I flipped on the lights. I could see the bridge ahead of me, and the sweep of my headlights caught something else. A blonde figure in a white sweater was trudging heavily along the side of the road just ahead, approaching the bridge. My pulse gave a bang of alarm. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge, which crossed Tampa Bay, had had more than its share of suicides. Oh, I didn't know that. The slumped shoulders and air of grief pouring off the lone figure in front of me told me that this might be another one if someone didn't do something. Typical of our day and age, the cars ahead just rushed past without stopping. But I slowed down. My mama had raised me in the church, and I knew it would be on my heart for a long time if I didn't try to help that poor young girl trudging out onto the long Skyway Bridge just before a terrible thunderstorm. I pulled alongside the blonde girl just as a strobe of lightning lit the sky overhead. I rolled my window down and called to her, but my words were lost in the resulting clap of thunder. I had to repeat myself before the lonely figure, so wrapped up in grief she hadn't even noticed my truck pulling over, looked around and saw me. Yes, I remember being on that when we were down there. We were there a few times on vacation. Yes, I bet it would. That thing is scary. I thought it was cool, but yes, it is scary. You look like you could use a lift, I said easily, giving her my best smile. You don't want to be caught on the bridge in this storm. Her face was pale and wan. There were lines of grief and pain around her eyes and lips. Strange to see in one so young. She hesitated a moment, staring into my eyes. Chills ran up and down my arms at her look. There was something almost unearthly about it, as if in her mind she'd already crossed over to the other side. Then she gave me a very faint smile and nodded. Hop in, I said, as the first spatters of rain hit my windshield. and a heavy gust of wind made made the huge truck sway. The girl bridged the few yards between us at a run as the heavens opened up. She jumped into the passenger seat just as the rain began pouring down with its own kind of thunder. Make sure you buckle up, I said to my passenger as I put on the blinker and edged back onto the highway. She fumbled with the car's seatbelt and then pulled it around her as the truck joined the other hardy souls crossing the skyway during a torrential storm. The lightning display alone was worth the trip, though I didn't like the heavy gusting wind that made the truck jiggle and sway. It took all my experience as a trucker to keep us moving steadily as we crossed the long bridge. Here's illustration. Where are you bound? I asked the girl when I felt the truck was back under my control. I had to speak quite loudly to be heard over the rat-a-tat of the rain and the booming of the thunder. The girl ducked her head so she could hide behind her long blonde hair. I don't really know, she muttered, so soft I could barely hear her over the rain. I caught a glimpse of tears on her pale cheeks just before a blonde tress obscured her face. She started wringing her hands in her lap, and I figured I shouldn't push my luck. At least I'd gotten her into the truck, and unless she was truly suicidal, she probably wouldn't jump out while I was driving. At least I hoped not. This is some storm, I said lightly, gesturing briefly as a truly enormous sheet of lightning struck the opposite shore. It was followed by a clap of thunder that made my ears ring, and once again I fought for control as the wind gusted over the span of the bridge. We were climbing toward the peak now, and the wind was bit worse up here. Beside me, the girl straightened in alarm and clasped her hands in front of her face as if in prayer. Dear Jesus, forgive me, she shouted suddenly. Oh, forgive me. For a moment, I thought she really would pull open the door and fling herself headlong out of the moving truck and over the side of the bridge. Instead, she turned to face me, her blue eyes luminous in a face so pale that it seemed to glow with its own inner light. Do you believe in God? She asked in an intense voice. And then she vanished from the passenger seat with a small puff of cold air. I swore desperately and swerved a bit in my agitation. Not a good move on a tall bridge in a thunderstorm. It took me nearly a minute to stabilize the truck, and I wasn't sure if the pounding fear in my head and heart was caused by the disappearing girl, let's face it, the disappearing ghost, or by the possibility of driving the truck off the wet bridge and joining her. I was still shaking when I reached the far end of the span, and I pulled off at the first exit advertising food. I drove around for a bit on the local roads, my body still trembling with shock and the profound, unearthly chill that filled the cab. Fortunately, I found a local diner not too far from the exit and parked the truck at the back of the lot. I raced through the downpour to the nearest door. When I got inside, the server took one look at my pale face and trembling wet body and brought me a hot cup of coffee as soon as I sat down. On the house, she said as I took a grateful sip, spilling some of the hot liquid on my hands and shirt, since I couldn't keep the cup from trembling in my grip. She instantly grabbed napkins from the next table and watched as I wiped up the spill. I drank the whole cup down and half of another one before I calmed down enough to take in my surroundings. The dinner crowd hadn't arrived yet, so there were only a few patrons in the dining area and a couple of fishermen at the bar. Want to tell me about it? Asked the server as she handed me a menu. I gulped a bit Is it that obvious? I asked as I took it from her hand. I can tell you've had a shock of some kind, she said kindly. I nodded and then told her my story. It took a while. She sat down across from me with her pad and pen poised, as if she were about to take my order so that the manager wouldn't yell if he saw her sitting there. And she listened with wide eyed attention, as if she believed every word I said. It made me feel better. I've heard about that ghost, the server, whose name tag said Amanda, said when I finished my story. They say she was a local college student who committed suicide after breaking up with her boyfriend. That was a long time ago, I reckon. None of the cops who came in here have a record or a recent suicide matching her description. Still, you're not the only one to see her. It must have been really spooky. It was, I said, taking another sip from my second cup of coffee. Well, thanks for telling me about it, said Amanda, rising and waving her order pad at me. You ready for something to eat? I nodded and ordered a hamburger all the way, thinking that Amanda was very nice and pretty, too. I glanced at her hand as she headed toward the kitchen with my order. No wedding band. Nice. Hi, Brody, from Ghana. New from Ghana. Well, it's lovely having you here. I hope you enjoy these spooky stories. Thank you for coming. I got Amanda's phone number before I headed out to my truck. She waved to me as I left and called, Don't pick up any more hitchhikers. I won't, I called back, waving to her over my shoulder. A practical, pretty girl like Amanda didn't come along every day, I mused. Not many girls would take a ghost story in their stride. She was pretty amazing. I decided that I wanted to take her out the next time I drove through St. Petersburg, and that's just what I did. Many years have passed since that day. Amanda is still doing amazing things as my wife and the mother of our kids, and I'm still driving my truck. Amanda and I often joke about the fact that a ghost brought us together, but I haven't picked up any hitchhikers since that day. This one is chapter 3 called In the Elevator, and it's from Coral Gables, Florida. Let me get a drink. When my husband told me he'd booked a romantic weekend at the Biltmore Hotel to celebrate our 5th anniversary, I could hardly believe it. As the mother of twin toddlers, my days of romantic rendezvous and candlelight dinners seemed a world away from the daily grind of diapers and crying and cartoon characters on television. But it was true. Grandma was taking care of the little ones for the whole weekend, and we were getting away from it all. The first thing I did was buy a stunning new dress of deep red with sequins that would make my husband's eyes pop. I'd worked hard to get my figure back after having twins, and this dress showed off how successful I'd been. Then I went hog wild and had my hair and nails done. So, Garnet, come on. For once, I felt like a beautiful woman and not just a hardworking mama. It was wonderful. My husband picked me up after work on Friday, and we drove into Coral Gables in sheer luxury. I'd heard about the wonders of the Biltmore Hotel, but the reality was even more mind boggling than the stories. There was the Central Tower, patterned after a tower in Seville, with the far flung wings on either side. And my husband waxed eloquent over the golf courses as we drove up to the valet. After checking in, we went to peek at the huge swimming pool with its private cabana suites. Then my husband took me up to the luxury suite he'd booked in the tower. It was sweet. You're a princess for a day, he told me when I protested the expense. And it was true. I felt like a princess when I saw that suite. I flung myself gracefully onto the bed, rolled over, and started giggling like a little girl. My husband flung himself down beside me, and we laughed and cuddled and laughed some more. It was a flashback to our courting days, and I loved it. We had dinner at the Fontana restaurant, and I felt my whole body relax as we strolled the columned walkways and breathed in the perfumed night air. I wore the red dress, and it was only my husband who gave me a second look that night. You are more beautiful now than you were in high school, my infatuated husband told me with a gleam in his eye. I gave him a sideways glance that promised a very happy evening ahead, and he squeezed my waist to seal the deal. We wandered around the hotel after dinner, admiring the grand lobby with its pillared elegance, marbled floors, lofty painted ceilings, and carved woodwork before taking the elevator upstairs to our own piece of heaven. My husband is crazy about golf, so he booked time with a pro the next morning while I went to the spa. We met for lunch and spent much of the afternoon by the pool in one of the private cabanas, lounging about and enjoying the peace and freedom. I finished the novel I was reading about 3 p.m. and rose luxuriously from my seat, saying, I'm going to get another book. Do you need anything from the suite? My husband shook his head, not bothering to open his eyes. I smiled indulgently. He was almost asleep. I brushed a kiss against his cheek and then pulled a frilly feminine wrap over my bikini before donning sandals and heading inside. I pushed the elevator button and stood gazingly happy at nothing, my head still back at the pool. I was the only one waiting for the elevator, but when the bell chimed and the door opened, I could have sworn that two of us got on. It was a strange feeling, and it disrupted my peaceful mood. The door slid shut, the elevator started rising, and someone blew on my neck. Ugh. I jumped and glanced around the luxurious interior. I was the only one inside the elevator. I could see my pale cheeks and startled expression in the mirrored wall. Just then, someone pinched my cheek. I felt it clearly. I gasped, and backed up until I was pressed against the railing. What was going on? I heard a distinctly masculine chuckle right there beside me. At the same time, I realized the elevator had gone right past my floor without stopping. Frantically, I jabbed the button, but the elevator kept going, only slowing when it passed the 12th floor. The elevator ground to a halt at the 13th floor, and I heard the bell chime. The doors opened in what I could only describe as a suggestive manner, and the smell of cigar smoke floated into the elevator. The whole atmosphere in the elevator was that of a man offering a romantic rendezvous to a pretty woman. Now I wasn't just frightened, I was offended. Just what kind of girl do you think I am? I said to the empty elevator doorway. I happen to be very happily married. The elevator doors closed rather reluctantly, and the car started moving downward toward my floor.
The invisible presence remained in the elevator with me, but it had to be a he, seemed a bit subdued now. As the bell chimed at my floor and the doors slid open, I caught a glimpse of a corpulent man leering at me from inside the mirror. He was staring suggestively at the frilly wrap that covered but did not obscure the pretty bikini I wore beneath. Completely freaked and still offended, I glared at the man in the mirror, glanced around the empty, but for me, elevator, and sprang out the doors as soon as they opened. Someone slapped me on the derriere just before the elevator doors swished shut behind me. I ran all the way to my suite, and I took the stairs when I went back down to the pool. Here's an illustration. I was still trembling, at least on the inside. 2 hours later, when my husband and I rode the elevator upstairs to change for dinner, but no invisible man accompanied us on this trip, thank God. I hadn't told my husband about the incident in the elevator. He would have thought I was crazy. He didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural and scoffed at such things. Still, I remembered hearing rumors that the Biltmore was haunted, so I paused to talk to a staff member after dinner while my husband was making another golf appointment for the next day. Hesitantly, I told her what I'd experienced in the elevator, and she nodded at me in understanding. That was Fatty, she told me. I blinked in surprise. Fatty? Fatty Walsh, the gangster, she said. He ran a speakeasy and high-stakes gambling casino on the 13th floor of the tower in the 1920s and early 1930s. He was shot and killed by a rival, but it was hushed up, and the murder was never solved. Wow, I said. And now he haunts the hotel? Let's just say you're not the first woman to complain, the woman said with a grin. Apparently, Fatty was a womanizer, and he loved Cuban cigars. Remembering the leering face in the mirror and the whiff of smoke I'd smelled on the 13th floor, I nodded. That's him, all right, I said. Well, look on the bright side, the woman said. Fatty liked beautiful women. If he took the time to accost you, it means you've still got it. That made me laugh. But do I dare tell my husband? I asked with a chuckle. Tell me what? Asked my handsome husband, coming over to join our conversation. That your wife still has it, the staff member said with a smile as I struck a pose in the shimmering red gown. You can say that again, said my appreciative spouse, pulling me close for a kiss. I thanked the woman, and we headed back upstairs to our romantic suite in the tower. It was with great reluctance that we checked out of the hotel on Sunday morning and headed back to our suburban home. On the way, we chatted about the hotel and our favorite memories of the weekend just past. But there was one memory I wouldn't be sharing with my husband. How do you tell a man who disbelieves in the supernatural that you've been slapped on the derriere by a womanizing ghost? I just couldn't do it. Maybe I'll tell him on our 10th anniversary. Well, I think that's going to be it, guys. I said it would be short. Maybe some of you are asleep. Anyway, I hope. And I appreciate coming so much and listening to this granny tell you stories. I gotta find my mouse. It's under here, okay. Thank you, guys. Sweet dreams. Good day. Thank you, Whisper to Me. You're always so good.